In the spirit of reconciliation, the Armenian Genocide Commemorative Committee acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which the production of this film has taken place and the connections to land, sea, and community. We pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples viewing this broadcast. On behalf of the Armenian Genocide Commemorative Committee, we welcome you to the Australian National Commemoration of the 107th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. 107 years ago, the first genocide of the 20th century claimed the lives of 1.5 million Armenian martyrs by the ruling of Young Turks of the Ottoman Empire. As we mark the 107th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, we also remember the calculated, malicious, inhumane, and genocidal attempts at exterminating the over 1 million Assyrian and Greek people of the Ottoman Empire, as well as other Christian minorities.
107 տարիներ առաջ 20-րդ դարու առաջին ցեղասպանությունը դեղի ունեցավ Օսմանյան գայսրության մեջ երիտ թուրքերու ցերքով, որուն զոհ դարձան 1.5 միլիոն հայեր։ Այսօր, երբ կհիշադակենք մեծ եղերնի 107-րդ ամյակը, մենք կվերհիշենք այն հաշվարկված, չարամիտ եւ անմարդկային ցեղասպանության արարքը, որ գմիդեր ասորի, հույն եւ այլ փոքրամասնություններու վերածումը Օսմանյան գայսրութենեն ներս։
On the morning of April 24, 1915, Turkish officials acted under the orders of the Ottoman government, rounding up over 250 prominent Armenian intellectuals and community figureheads in Constantinople, marking the first stage of the attempts to eradicate the existence of the Armenian people living in their ancestral homeland. What followed were indiscriminate and malicious acts of violence against innocent civilians, acts forever etched in the collective memory of the Armenian people. Talat Pasha, Enver Pasha, and Jamal Pasha ordered large-scale massacres, death marches, and deportations of the Armenian children, women, and men living in the Ottoman Empire. Indiscriminate actions from a xenophobic and autocratic state were enacted with one purpose: the extermination of the Armenian race for no reason other than their ethnicity and Christian faith.
1915-ին ապրիլ 24-ին երիտ թուրքերու գարավարության հրահանգով գարավարության ներկայացուցիչները Գոստանտնու բոլսո մեջ ցերփակալեցին 250 հայ մտավորականներ եւ ասկի ղեկավարներ, սկիզբը տնելով իրենց չարամիտ ծրագրին ոչնչացնելու հայ ժողովուրդը իր բաբենական հողերեն։ Այսօր հաջորդեց անմեղ հայ քաղաքացիներու նկատմամբ կործաթրված չարամիտ վայրենիությունները։ Թալատ, Ընվեր եւ Ջեմալ Փաշաներու հրամանով մեծ զավալով ըսպանդ մահվան գարավաններու գազմագերբում, որուն մաս կազմեցին գիներ ու երեխաներ։ Օդարադյաց ու անմարդկային այս արարքները գհետաբնթեին մեկ նպատակ՝ քննչնչել հայ ժողովուրդը իր ասկային պատկանելիության եւ քրիստոնեական հավատքին պատճառով։
The perpetrator regime that embarked on a campaign to violently eradicate the Armenian race justified their actions as precautionary measures that were essential to the defense of the empire during World War I. History has since shown that mass atrocities and genocide are almost always perpetrated within the context of armed conflict, and the atrocities of the Armenian, Greek, and Assyrian people were no exceptions. There was such clear intent to uproot the deeply ingrained and centuries-old Armenian roots of the land that diplomats on the ground and historians who came later have uncovered unequivocal evidence of acts that can only be described as genocide. A coordinated government plan of a series of actions aimed at the destruction of the essential foundations of the lives of Armenian people, their villages, language, culture, institution, and humankind. And with these destructions, the goal was eventually annihilate the Armenians themselves. This mass race-based crime has no name until 1944.
Ոջրաքորձ այս իշխանությունը գբաջարապաներ, թե իր ոջրային արարքները գայսրության պաշտպանությունը ապահովելու ըսկուշական միջոցներ էին առաջին համաշխարհային պատերազմի օրերուն։ Սակայն պատմությունը հաստատեց, թե անոնք հայ, հույն եւ ասորի փոքրամասնություններու թեմ ծրագրված ոճիրներ էին։
However, it is not only the tales of history that brings us together on this day, but also the horrors of the present. In 2020, Armenians around the world witnessed their stories and traumas their grandparents spoke about vividly play out in front of our eyes through our screens.
Այսօր ոչ միայն բամության այս թեփքն է, որ մեզ համախմբած է, այլ ներգան, որովհետև հայությունը 2020 թվականին ականադեսը դարձավ նույն ողբերգության, որուն թրվակները լսած էր իր մեծ հայրերեն։
In September 2020, we witnessed an escalation of violence perpetrated by the neo-Ottoman pan-Turkic genocidal regimes of Azerbaijan and Turkey against the indigenous Armenians of the Republic of Artsakh. Over 5,000 Armenians dead, hundreds in Azerbaijani captivity, and more than 100,000 refugees as a result of Azerbaijani and Turkish aggression. September 2020 serves as a reminder of the atrocities that happen when world leaders turn a blind eye. Until today, modern manifestations of the 1915 genocide continue. We see footage and images of the Armenian families forcefully leaving the Republic of Artsakh and the border towns within the recognized borders of the Republic of Armenia, loading their livelihoods into cars and fleeing their homes with no destination. These images are no paradox to the dusted prints of our ancestors fleeing on foot 107 years ago.
2020 սեպտեմբերին մենք տեսանք նույն վայրակությունները, որ կատարված էին ցեղասպան Թուրքին կողմեն, այս անգամ թուրք-ադրբեջանական ոճրագործներու համագործակցությամբ Արցախի փնիկ ասկապնակցության թեմ, ինչ որ պատճառ դարձավ, որ մարդիկ լքեն իրենց ունեցվածքը ու փախչին ոյվե ուղությամբ փրկվելու համար վայրակություններեն։ 107 տարիներ յետք գգրկնվեր նույն թժնթակ ճակատագիրը հայ ժողովրդին։
Over a century on, the historical reality of the Armenian, Assyrian, and Greek genocides continue to be denied. It is through the denial and non-recognition of historical realities that regimes around the world feel empowered to repeat the horrors of history. Authoritarian-led countries around the world launching unprovoked wars, claiming sovereignty over historical lands. Fathers leaving behind children to defend their country. Medieval churches and monuments bombed. Thousands of lives upended and war crimes committed. These conflicts are not mutually exclusive, but the parallels could not be starker. History must be affirmed.
Բադմական թարն ճակատագիրը, որ վիճակվեցավ հայ, հույն եւ ասորի ժողովուրդներուն, գշարնագե մերժումը արժանանալ, որը գմղե այլ հավաքականություններուն նույն ճակատագրին այս օրերուն եւս։ Փեռնաբեդական ու ամփոխչադիրական դերություններ այսօր եւս աշխարհի դարածքին բادرազմներ գմղեն, փեռնակրավելով ուրիշին հողերը։ Ընտանիքներ կբաժնվին, երբ հայրեր կփորձեն պաշտպանել իրենց հայրենիքը։ Եկեղեցիներ կդառնան ռմփագործման թիրախ։ Հազարավորներ կսպանվին ու բادرազմական ոճիրներ կկործվին։ Այս երևույթները դեղի կունենան, որովհետև բոլոր նման թեփքերու զուգահեռները ագնահայտ են եւ կործատրողները անբադիժ մնացած են։
For us Armenian Australians and Armenians worldwide, our battle will continue. This is not the end. We remember, we demand.
Մեզի ավստրալահայերուս եւ համայն աշխարհի հայերուն համար պայքարը կշարունակվի հարադեվորեն։ Մենք կհիշենք, մենք կբահանջենք։
It is very important that we acknowledge the reality of the Armenian Genocide, that efforts are consistently made to educate those who are not yet aware of it, that efforts are consistently made to correct the fallacious attempts by some to distort or to minimise or to whitewash the historic reality of what happened. I'm proud on this 107th anniversary to repeat my call to again express my strong belief that the Armenian Genocide must be recognised, it must be accurately described for what it was, and that Australia as part of the community of nations, must maintain efforts to ensure there is full awareness of what happened and maintain efforts such that an atrocity of this kind never happens again.
Today, we mark 107 years since the great crime of the Armenian Genocide. In doing so, we join with millions around the world to honour the memories of family and community members lost during this terrible period. But our commemoration is about more than just remembering. It's about commitment. Commitment to learning from such atrocities, to making sure these crimes against humanity are never repeated again. 25 years ago, the New South Wales Parliament became the first in Australia to formally recognise and condemn the Armenian Genocide. I am proud to be part of that Parliament because we cannot forget. Together, we must champion and defend the values of peace, justice, and humanity. That's how we remember the great crime. So on behalf of the people of New South Wales and Government of New South Wales, I offer you my sincere and heartfelt condolences.
Each year on the eve of April 24, we remember the lives lost during the Armenian Genocide. We remember and affirm this history, not to cast blame, but to ensure that no such atrocity occurs again. And this is why I'm a proud signatory to the Joint Justice Initiative. Today, I mourn the loss of life, honour the stories of survival, and acknowledge the loss and pain that endures for so many families. In 2021, President Biden officially recognized the atrocities committed against the people of Armenia in 1915 as genocide. After 106 years of suffering and displacement, this is an important issue for which the Armenian community, including here in Australia, have advocated for many years. Well, Australia has historically taken a different approach. Labor believes the Biden administration's decision is an opportunity for the Australian government to engage in dialogue with diaspora communities in Australia and our international partners on this issue.
On behalf of the Australian Greens, I want to send my heartfelt condolences to the Armenian community as we mark the 107th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. The Greens have consistently called for the Australian government to recognise the Armenian Genocide. We must not remain on the wrong side of history, along with Turkey and other nations that refuse to acknowledge this horrific tragedy. It's only through an honest accounting and a commemoration of the lives lost that we can work towards ensuring that the tragic events of history do not recur. To the families and descendants of the 1.5 million Armenians killed by the Ottoman Empire, and the Greeks and Assyrians who were also killed, our thoughts are with you. We reaffirm our solidarity and commit to raising this in the Parliament and in the community and condemning serious human rights violations against those living in Artsakh.
Dear friends, I'd like to begin this advocacy address by asserting the following. As we speak, there are forces attempting to pressure the Republic of Armenia into ceding justice for the Armenian Genocide, into accepting that the Republic of Artsakh be considered part of the Republic of Azerbaijan. To these forces, Armenian Australians say no. Sadly, delivering this no seems something that is out of reach for certain leaders in the Republic of Armenia. To them, we say you do not speak for us. We, descendants of the 1.5 million victims and survivors of the Armenian Genocide, say you have no right to forego their human sacrifice, properties, possessions, and birthright that were forcefully taken away from our ancestors in the mass race-based crime that led to the coining of the term genocide. You do not speak for us because you are unable to say no. Our community empowers bodies like the Armenian National Committee of Australia to advocate for these rights in the hallways of power across Australia. Other communities around the world have similar structures with mandates for bringing recognition and delivering justice for the gravest crime against humanity, which took the lives of so many who came before us. the memory of the 1.5 million and the death of thousands of soldiers at the hands of those who were inspired by the Ottoman perpetrators of the Armenian Genocide will not be left in vain as long as we have a voice. To this end, as we commemorate the 107th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, we are proud that our community has led with unwavering commitment towards this pursuit of justice. In the last year, we have seen Prime Minister Scott Morrison recognise the humanitarian outpouring of Australian support for Armenian, Assyrian and Greek survivors of the 1915 genocide. He also referred to the crimes as deportations, dispossession and death faced by the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire. While this is progress in the name of advocacy, it is disappointing that our country's Prime Minister fails to acknowledge that these deportations, dispossession and death were a result of targeted attempts to wipe out the Armenian race from their ancestral homeland. He continues to fail to acknowledge these crimes as genocide. We are encouraged that Australia's Foreign Minister has conceded that the government's position on the Armenian Genocide is finally under review.
Is this actually a matter under review by government? We are obviously viewing actions of other countries on this matter and drawing those into our consideration as well.
We are further encouraged that our collective advocacy efforts as part of the Joint Justice Initiative, together with the Assyrian Australian and Greek Australian communities, have resulted in achieving the greatest momentum towards achieving a positive outcome of this review, effectively rendering the Australian government's position on referring to the Armenian Genocide with euphemisms as an untenable. Over 40 sitting federal parliamentarians have signed up to the Joint Justice Initiative, calling on the Australian government to recognise the Armenian Genocide accurately. These are MPs and senators, many from the government calling on their executive branch to reflect the will of the everyday Australian whom they represent. In November 2021, the efforts of the Joint Justice Initiative culminated in an unprecedented debate in the House of Representatives, where all who rose in the Federation Chamber debated in favour of a motion outright calling on the Australian government to recognise the Armenian, Assyrian and Greek genocides.
These crimes cannot be forgotten, and Australia must play its part in making sure they're not. We owe it to truth and justice. We owe it to the memory of the millions who perished and their descendants, and to the hope of atonement. And we owe it to the world as we strive to achieve a more peaceful global community, free of crimes that threaten whole communities based on their attributes of race or culture or belief.
That is genocide, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is no other word for it, and it's time the Australian Parliament joined with many others who have recognised it as such.
The word genocide didn't come from a lab or through an experiment. It was first used in 1944 in reference to the killing of Armenians in the 1910s.
And it was significant that the US parliaments and the US Houses of Congress did recognise the Armenian Genocide, and I thank the member from North Sydney for taking the steps in today in replicating and taking steps so that Australian Houses of Parliament do the same, and hopefully one day the Prime Minister of Australia follows suit.
There is of course a link between the Armenian Genocide and the Holocaust, and it is the phrase that the member for North Sydney reminded us of, that Hitler famously said, "Who after all speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" And that demonstrates what happens when people forget what's happened and they misunderstand the particularity of what's gone on in a particular genocide. And
as we heard earlier, President Biden has recognised that many countries around the world have recognised the genocide, and it's about time that we did too, because if we don't recognise humanity's mistakes, they're there to be committed again. And it's not about putting one ethnicity against another. As we heard, we recognise the Holocaust of World War II. It doesn't mean that German people are bad. It just means that we recognise an atrocity so it can never, ever take place again.
The progress in Prime Minister Morrison's statement, the ongoing review of the government's policy on the Armenian Genocide, And the swell of support for this issue in Canberra is the direct result of the Armenian Australian, Assyrian Australian, and Greek Australian communities' advocacy efforts. These must continue until Australia stands on the right side of truth and justice on this issue, like the New South Wales and South Australian parliaments and over 30 countries worldwide. When we visit Canberra, we do not compromise on an elected MP's characterisation of 1915 as genocide. There is no ambiguity that the Armenian Australian community will not rest until the Prime Minister and Government of Australia accurately refers to the Armenian Genocide. The results of states failing to condemn and demand justice for genocide is no longer an abstract argument. Azerbaijan's actions as the perpetrators of the 2020 Artsakh war have illuminated the argument that failing to condemn past crimes lead to them being repeated. The disturbing ideology that motivated the Hitlers of the Armenian Genocide reared its ugly head again in the Armenian Republic of Artsakh on the 27th of September 2020, when Azerbaijan's Ilham Aliyev, aided by his fellow Turkic dictator Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, armed by the impunity granted to their forebears, openly displayed his allegiance to the expansionist ideology of pan-Turkism and committed 44 days of war crimes against the indigenous Armenians of the Republic of Artsakh, with the open intent to cleanse the region of its original inhabitants. Since signing what was supposed to be a ceasefire agreement in November 2020, Azerbaijan has continued to commit war crimes against Armenian POWs, while embarking on a campaign of cultural genocide, desecrating Armenian churches and sites of heritage. Azerbaijan has also continued its advance, taking up posts in the recognised and sovereign borders of the Republic of Armenia, threatening to go all the way to the nation's capital Yerevan if Armenians do not give up the homes built by their parents and grandparents over centuries. Like these neo-Ottomans continue to repeat the wrongs of their predecessors, the Australian government is repeating the errors of sitting on their hands by so far failing to publicly call out the perpetrators as Azerbaijan and victims as Armenians. Australia's both-sidism on this issue is endangering the lives of an Armenian nation that is being ethnically cleansed from their roots, and this is unacceptable. Our community's position is clear. Any legislator or executive leader elected to office in Australia who relies on the support of the Armenian Australian community must recognise the rights to self-determination of the Armenian people of Artsakh and must publicly condemn any and all actions that serve to diminish those rights. Our country's foreign minister has altered Australia's position in that she now consistently asserts that the final resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict must be achieved under the auspices of all three co-chair countries of the OSCE Minsk Group, and that the principle of self-determination must be equally considered alongside territorial integrity and the non-use of force in reaching a just settlement of the conflict. While this is progress in words, Australia's actions are behind the standards Canberra has recently set during Russia's actions in Ukraine. The rightful humanitarian support for the Ukrainians under fire by Australia must be consistently applied to victims of all conflicts, including the Armenians of the Republic of Artsakh and the Republic of Armenia. Our community continues to demand that Australia provides necessary aid to those organisations working to assist the displaced and incarcerated victims of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. We will not relent in this demand. Prime Minister Scott Morrison and the alternative choice for Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, have once again failed to provide statements correctly characterising the Armenian, Assyrian and Greek genocides. This is unacceptable and will be an issue we prosecute in our meetings with those seeking elected office from their respective teams in the upcoming federal elections. We will report back to our community where they stand so Armenian Australians are informed about the positions of those seeking their vote when they head to the polls on the 21st of May 2022. Regardless, on this 107th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, we pledge to continue to march, to protest, to advocate, and our next generation of activists will ensure this battle lasts as long as it needs to, until Australia recognises as genocide what was committed against the Armenians, Assyrians and Greeks in 1915. We remember and we demand.
It has been an important 12 months, and I'm very proud that as chair of the Australian Parliamentary Union Friends of Armenia, that last year we were actually able to propose and have debated in the Australian Parliament for the very first time a motion actually calling on the Australian government and the Australian Parliament to properly recognise the Armenian Genocide. It's unfinished business, and I'm committed as ever to making sure that Australia joins the ranks of those other nations that have said that we're not prepared to let this genocide be ignored. We're not prepared to forget those lives and the lessons that must be learned from a tragedy such as this. So today we come together, committed and resolved to make sure that those lives of Armenians that were so wantonly and cruelly taken are never forgotten. It's our duty as fellow members of the human community to do that, and I will continue to advocate for that cause.
107 years on, the pain of the Armenian Genocide lives with us through the unrecognised lives lost and the attempts to erase Armenian culture from the face of the earth. Sadly, these events feel all too real, resulting from recent conflict in Armenia and in nearby countries. As the only federal parliamentarian with Armenian heritage, and with other sympathetic colleagues like North Sydney MP Trent Zimmerman, we continue to give voice in the Parliament to the memory and recognition of this tragedy. In Trent's and my time in Parliament, we have taken practical steps to increase awareness of the genocide, its impact, and the continued stain the absence of acknowledgement leaves. We have done so not just through resolutions about the genocide itself, but also its place amongst the genocides of the 20th century, and to remember the Anzacs, who bore witness to the actions of the Ottoman Empire. As you know, out of tragedy can also bring the best in the human spirit, including the first international aid effort founded from Melbourne to help Armenian orphanages. As a local MP representing a large Jewish community, Goldstein knows firsthand the cost of silence and how it can lead to unspeakable future events. On this Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day, we commit to redouble our efforts should we have the privilege to serve in the next Parliament, to continue giving voice to the community that lives with this pain, to aid global efforts to honour the memory of the victims deceased and their descendants.
The Greens have long called for the Australian Government to recognise the Armenian Genocide. It is unacceptable that the Australian Government has failed to recognise this tragedy. Recognising the genocide committed against the Armenian people is important to show our care and our respect to the families and descendants of the 1.5 million Armenians who were killed in the Armenian Genocide. It is also important that we recognise this genocide and call it what it is, as part of our commitment to oppose any violent act, especially those that dehumanise and destroy vulnerable groups.
Today I stand with you to remember and to commemorate the genocide that took place 107 years ago. A genocide that was perpetrated on Armenian people, on Assyrians and Greeks in modern-day Turkey under the Ottoman rule. This year, a historical event also took place in the Australian Federal Parliament, an historical event that recognised the genocide by the Parliament with a motion that was put to the Parliament. I'm very pleased that all members of the Parliament from all political parties voted in support of this motion. It was an important motion because in a democracy like Australia, we should remember these atrocities to ensure that they never take place and to recognise them. To those thousands of people that have made their homes here in Australia who are of Armenian ancestry, Assyrian ancestry, or like myself of Greek ancestry, it's important for us to remember and to recognise that our ancestors lived through some brutal times. Let's hope that these atrocities never take place again.
Hitler said when he was planning the Holocaust that what does it matter who remembers the Armenians? It is so important that we remember tragedies and genocide in our past, because it is only by remembering and only by acknowledging them that we can avoid them in our future. On this day, we remember all those who died, all those who were murdered, and all those who were displaced by this atrocious act.
Armenians have inhabited the homes of their forebears for centuries, regardless of who has ruled the contested borders in the Caucasus to Anatolia. Their distinct language and Christian faith has always distinguished them from their neighbours. In 1915, under the pretense of World War I, the Ottoman Turkish government set a policy of systematic extermination of the Armenian race to ensure that the Armenians would follow in the footsteps of their many persecuted peoples and prevent them from establishing an Armenian nation-state on their native lands. No less than a day later, after beginning of what would be referred to as the Armenian Genocide, the Anzacs landed ashore at Gallipoli. Anzac prisoners of war witnessed firsthand the execution of genocide, the death marches, the killing fields, and the concentration camps from Deir ez-Zor through to the rest of the Middle East. They scribed their testimonies, and these Gallipoli veterans were among those who played an instrumental role in providing humanitarian aid to the Armenian and Assyrian refugees fleeing in 1915. The main theme of Armenian modern history has been the struggle for survival against the encroachment of bad actors. Gegham Stepanyan is the human rights ombudsman of the Republic of Artsakh. He details from the ground the real challenge for survival against the realization of the goal to rid the world of an Armenian nation.
The Human Rights Ombudsman's Office is one of the institutions of the Artsakh Republic that carried out during the war and today continues to carry out the work of recording the widespread human rights violations and the criminal policy of Azerbaijan against the people of Artsakh. Our task and our mission is to document the devastating consequences of the Azerbaijani policy and to present to the world what Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, is doing against our people. The Azerbaijani-Turkish aggression of 2020 was the continuation of the Armenian Genocide. First of all, the goal of the Armenian Genocide and the goal of Azerbaijani-Turkish aggression were the same: to erase Armenia and to erase Artsakh from the map, and to deprive Armenian people of their homeland. Just like during the Armenian Genocide, we Armenians were deprived of our historical homeland. Today, Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, is doing the same, trying to deprive Artsakh Armenians from our homeland. The ideology behind the Armenian Genocide and the Azerbaijani ideology behind the Azerbaijani-Turkish aggression of 2020 are also very similar. I would say the same. And they are focused on Armenophobia and hatred based on ethnic origin. Armenian identity was seen and perceived as a threat by Ottomans, just like it is perceived as a threat by Azerbaijanis. And in the Ottoman Empire, the Armenian anti-Armenian and Armenophobic policy was sponsored in a state level, just like today it is sponsored in the state level by Azerbaijan. For almost 30 years, Azerbaijani authorities were and continue to implement an Armenophobic policy, nourishing the society with anti-Armenian propaganda.
The challenges faced by Armenians at the outset of the last century still exist today. Azerbaijan's use of internationally condemned and prohibited weapons, their desecration of historical monuments and places of worship, their treatment of Armenian prisoners, and their general Armenophobic policies are fueling their campaign to ethnically cleanse Artsakh of its Armenian people. This campaign has deprived Nagorno-Karabakh's indigenous Armenians of their legitimate right to live in their families' homes, while forcing them to suffer what are unavoidable losses. They have been bombarded with missile attacks, cluster munitions, Syrian mercenaries, public executions of illegally detained Armenian prisoner of wars, and the killing of innocent Armenian people, whose only crime in the eyes of Azerbaijan was the exercising of their human right to self-determination.
All our reports depicted the real situation on the ground. They included the evidences about the crimes such as deliberate and indiscriminate attacks on the civilian settlements, civilian infrastructure, houses, hospitals, schools, kindergartens, water and gas pipelines, mutilation, torture, and inhuman treatment of our prisoners of war, civilian population, and many other crimes. The policy of Azerbaijan has not been changed since the establishment of ceasefire. Azerbaijan's actions after the ceasefire demonstrate that Baku continues to adhere to a consistent, systematic and coordinated policy aimed at keeping the population of Artsakh in a constant terror and fear and creating unbearable conditions for the people of Artsakh. After the establishment of ceasefire, Azerbaijani side used every method to intimidate our population and to force people to leave their homes. At least 100 cases of the violation of ceasefire have been recorded by the law enforcement bodies of the Republic of Artsakh, and the Ombudsman's office each time made a statement presenting the details and consequences of those violations. As a result, 3 civilians and 30 servicemen were killed after the establishment of ceasefire, and a great property damage was caused to our civilian population.
Continued Azerbaijani intervention of civilian structures has disrupted the natural gas from Armenia, depriving nearly 120,000 native Armenians of heating and water, forcing schools and medical centres to close. Adverse weather conditions have presented an opportunity for the regime of Azerbaijan to create an atmosphere of humanitarian hopelessness for the Armenian population. Azeri intervention with gas supply against the backdrop of heightened tensions is no coincidence. It is the illegal continuation of the war against Armenian civilians outside the battlefield.
During this 1.5 years, they tried every method, blocking the communication, internet accessibility, cutting electricity supply, and many other. On March 8, the Azerbaijani side intentionally blew up the only gas pipeline coming from the Republic of Armenia to Artsakh. By this, depriving the population of Artsakh of gas supply, heating, hot water accessibility. At first, they blocked the access of the specialist of local gas supply company to the damaged part of the pipeline for implementing restoration works. Then they restored the operation of the gas pipeline, but 3 days later they cut the supply again. The main goal of Azerbaijan was to keep the population without heating and hot water, and almost for 20 days the whole population of Artsakh was deprived of gas supply in an abnormally cold weather conditions, which brought our population on the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe. Of course, the gas supply was restored, but it turned out that the Azerbaijani side installed a valve on the pipeline in order to be able to close it and to terrorize our population anytime they wish, and to leave us without gas supply.
In May 2021, with the world's eyes focused on the Middle East, Azeri seized Sev Lake, this time encroaching into the Sunnik province of sovereign Armenia, a clear infringement of territorial integrity by Azerbaijan. On the 24th of March, Azerbaijani military forcefully advanced in the Paruk region in Artsakh, using firearms and attack drones, grossly violating the November 2020 ceasefire agreement and resulting in the forced evacuation of 400 men and women and children from their homes, ethnic cleansing in the year 2022 before our very eyes.
Since February 24, started a psychological attack on the population of Khramort village of Askeran region. Using loudspeakers, they were urging the civilian population to stop agricultural works and to leave the territory. On March 8, the Azerbaijani side started to shell the civilian communities in Askeran and Martuni regions, using not only small arms but also mortars. And on March 24, the Azerbaijani side, grossly violating the ceasefire, the trilateral statement on ceasefire, invaded the territory of Artsakh and captured the village of Parukh and nearby height of Karagaluh. Today, the Azerbaijani troops remain on the height of Karagaluh, which is a strategical height for the whole Askeran region, because from there, Azerbaijani side is directly observing the life of people and threatens them with the use of force. These kind of actions were also used against the population of other communities, Taghavart, Karmir Shuka, even Stepanakert. The actions of Azerbaijan resulted in a new wave of displacement of people. Over 400 people were displaced from Parukh and Khramort villages. And today they are living in Stepanakert and other villages of the same region. Parukh and Khramort are the vivid examples of the policy of ethnic cleansing that is being implemented by the Azerbaijani authorities, backed by Turkey. And if before, in the past, we had to prove to the international community, to foreign observers, that the main goal of Azerbaijan is to implement ethnic cleansing, then it is more than vivid, and these two villages are the proof of that policy.
The ripples left in the wake of war continue to be deeply felt by the people of Artsakh. 5,000 dead and over 100,000 refugees, yet these numbers do not begin to scratch the surface of the deep trauma and pain suffered by the innocent Armenian population of Artsakh. An entire generation of young men wiped from the pages of history. Families torn apart and forced to evacuate the homes that had been passed down through generations. On the front line, fathers, sons, brothers, defending their ancient homeland, their families not knowing whether or not they will return home, not knowing whether their lives will be changed forever. The atrocities witnessed by our ancestors, passed down through generations, are now unfolding and have become the reality of men, women and children of Artsakh. With this conflict unresolved and ongoing sporadic skirmishes, the only casualties of this unprovoked war continue to be the people of Artsakh.
Mingelet henk xoxan üras xoxetni yonum elə Azərbaycanların benim dərdən düşkəm üras xoçabı. Kəhin etə. Dırma elə çığaspan üçün. Rovur çıxan hası esik. Min erquyya kantanikam kinyam. Gorçun kanın bıstınırım o gorçka. Tahin çavan kıparılyakan etə çubudum. Kanyana var arıva çanaka hetnana in kesek tanırım erkərlən çıxmış min gorsanik. Kırlyanın kaniçe. Çe, xoxa kahur, xoxa bar kahur. Çe, vış manka parti, vış şkol, vış milpi. Ene miner kuyre kantanik yamın kinyam.
Manam elçin.
Çe, manam hova manam. Ha, atımı mim gideyin tampayın çınanım. Vıldığın yeşili kırak çitarım. Vındi yeşil karokulu oxuanı taşlıyordum. Eskırvis inyasını kutivisi to minuxtana sunan tani kaprilisin kaler. Elə ləvan kalər, esksan tavakan, esksan tivo var karravasksic. Nartar luxti gahantar renk. Mikani oki bejin sekal nankeli bir sekal. Որպես անին ցեղասպանություն են։ Ոզմուն հայերեն կոտորացնին, ոզմուն հայերեն սպանացնին։ Ոզմուն չեն հայը էս երգին իրես մկային ախե, մուկույանց ինչքան։ Թոնքյան հետ ապրի ես ինձ հետ ապրիմ։
In 2020, we witnessed the international community's deafening silence during the Artsakh War. Despite public appeals to the international community to condemn war crimes and unprovoked attacks by Azerbaijan, the world remained silent. What we expect from Australia is to stop both-sidism, to publicly condemn Azerbaijan as the aggressor, and to provide aid, like she has, to Ukraine, Lebanon, and many others.
The international community was silent when Armenians were being killed in Ottoman Empire during 1950 Armenian Genocide. Even today, Armenians are struggling to reach international recognition of the Armenian Genocide. The same silence we faced during the Azerbaijani-Turkish aggression of 2020. And today, we are facing the same silence. And I understand that human rights agenda is very much subjugated to the political and geopolitical interests of the states, but as a human rights defender, as an ombudsman, I do believe that human rights must be universal and all human beings of the world must be guaranteed with the same rights.
As history continues to repeat itself in the Republic of Artsakh, Armenians pledge to stand with the people of Artsakh and the 1.5 million Armenian genocide victims, to raise their concerns, be their voices, be their advocates in the international arena, and defend the soil we call home.
Սիրելի ժողովուրդ, այսօր Ավստրալիայությունը առցանց գնշե Եղեռնի 107-րդ ամյակը։ 100-ամյակին Եղեռնի մեծ հույսերով էինք եւ մեծ երազներ ունեինք, որ 100 տարի վերջ կամաց մեր երազները պիտի իրականանան եւ բնականաբար այդ երազներուն թուրը եւ փանալին Արցախն էր։ Սակայն դժբախտաբար 44 օրվա պատերազմի ընթացքին տեսանք թե ինչ կատարվեց եւ մեր հույսերը չեմսեր ամբողջովին վերացան, սակայն որոշ հարված մստացանք, ճիշտ է որ վիրավորվեցանք, սակայն զունգի չեկանք, չսկետնվեցանք, մեր հույսերը պիտի չգործընծնենք, որտեղ մենք գիտենք որ մեր բանջները արդար են, մենք մեր Եղեռնուի զոհերը որ սրբացուցած ենք, անոնց պիտի նաև միացնենք մեր Արցախի զոհերը եւ այդ մեր նահատակներու առջև մենք երբեք դեղի պիտի չտանք եւ պիտի փորձենք ամեն ինչ կատարել, որպեսզի մեր արդար երազները իրականանան։
This year I'm pleased to add my voice again alongside the Armenian Australian community and Armenians worldwide in commemorating the 107th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. At this time we remember the Ottoman Empire's atrocities in systematically murdering 1.5 million Armenians as well as 1 million Assyrians and Greeks simply because of who they were. We also remember the efforts of Australians in providing aid to those affected by the atrocities, including the survivors and orphans, in what was Australia's first international humanitarian effort. Let's also not forget the Artsakh War, launched by Azerbaijan 2 years ago, and its ongoing illegal occupation of Armenia's borders. We cannot afford to forget the past, nor ignore the injustices that still occur. So let us remember the victims and stand with Armenians to call for the formal recognition in naming these events for what they were: genocide.
I was one of the MPs who spoke in favour of recognising the Armenian and Assyrian and Greek genocide
in the federal parliament last year. I proudly stood with the Armenian community then in our federal parliament, and I stand with you again tonight. I hope to see in our country the leadership demonstrated by the US House of Representatives and the Senate and by the US President Joe Biden in properly recognising the Armenian genocide. It's not good enough that it's taken this long, and it's not good enough that your community has had to fight for what's right and what's just. But we stand with you, and we wish you strength in your journey and your advocacy. And we say to you, as part of the Australian Parliament and as part of the people who recognise the true history that happened to your people, that you are right, your cause is just, and that history will recognise the true occurrences of what happened to the Armenian people. I wish you well, I wish you a good night, and I'll see you soon.
It is so important that we call out the Armenian genocide for what it was. Because when you fail to call out genocides at the time, and you fail to call out genocides from the past, they ultimately lead to future genocides. As a Jewish Australian, I've always been conscious to call out the Armenian genocide and to stand in solidarity with the Armenian people. And there's a particular reason for this. One of the things that Adolf Hitler chose to do in World War II and in the period in the lead up to World War II, when he was performing the genocide against the Jewish people, was to think that he could get away with it, saying the words, "After all, whoever speaks of the Armenians." It's for this reason and for many others that we need to be honest about our history here. I'm pleased to stand in solidarity with the Armenian people, and I stand with you at this time of memory in your yearly calendar.
I support the Armenian people who are survivors and who fostered an ongoing wonderful culture and nation. Unfortunately, they are under stress with conflict with Azerbaijan at the present time on their borders. But I support the Armenian people and their wish to have a peaceful and successful life. And I support them in particular with their wants and aims for the future. I've met with the Armenian youth delegation and I completely support their wants and their principles.
Parev says, I'm privileged to chair the Armenian Australian Friendship Group in our Parliament. And in that capacity, together with the Deputy Chair, I wrote last year to the federal government supporting humanitarian assistance for the displaced people of Armenian heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh. Our friendship group also wrote to the Prime Minister calling for the federal government, the federal parliament, to recognise the Armenian genocide of more than a century ago, just as the New South Wales Parliament has done formally on a number of occasions.
Today marks the 107th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. It is a day where we stop and remember the millions of Armenian, Greek and Assyrian men, women and children who have perished at the hands of the Ottoman Empire from 1915 to 1923. Dispossessed from their ancestral land, these people were made to march across the Syrian desert to their unfortunate end. History can make us uncomfortable about the events of the past, but being uncomfortable is important for helping us remember what happens when tyranny goes unchecked. And that is why today, on the 107th anniversary of this genocide, we stop and reflect on this terrible act. I'm proud to be a representative of the New South Wales Parliament, which has unanimously recognised the terrible atrocity of what it is and was a genocide. New South Wales also recognises the importance of the Republic of Artsakh. Australia and our great state has provided a home and a sanctuary for many of the children, grandchildren and even the great-grandchildren of the victims of this genocide. And that is what makes New South Wales so great. We bring our collective histories together to make sure that the atrocities that have been experienced in the past are never repeated again.
April 24 Մեծ եղեն Անկամ եւս կոգեգոչենք ապրիլյան զոհերուն Մերգես միլիոն հայ նահատակներուն հիշադակը Հողին գորուստը Հայրենի հողեն արմադախիլ ըլլալու թարն իրականությունը Սակայն այսօր գրգին անգամ մենք մեզի հարցնելու ենք թե ինչ է մեր բարդականությունը ինչ է իմ բարդականությունս մեր բարդականությունն է մեկ ըլլալ մեր չանկերում մեջ որպես եկեղեցիներ որպես քաղաքական գուսակցություններ միություններ մեկ ըլլալ մեր ճանկերուն մեջ եւ բահանջել մեր արդար իրավունքները, մինչև որ դիրանանք մեր արդար իրավունքներուն։ Իմ աղոթքս է Արասված, որ դերը մեզի իմաստություն շնորհե, մեզի միություն շնորհե, որպես ազգ եւ մեր ազգը օրհնե։
There are some things in our world that are uncertain, but there are some things that are absolute. And what took place 107 years ago was the Armenian Genocide. That is an absolute fact. And I don't understand why governments from all around the world play word games in not absolutely acknowledging this fact. I stand in complete solidarity with Armenians all around the world in their pursuit for justice. If we don't acknowledge what took place in the past, how can we move forward as a civilised society?
It is important on this 107th commemoration of the Armenian Genocide to acknowledge the existence and the participation in Australia of all those Armenian immigrants to Australia. Today is a day on which we remember. Remembering is an important component of acknowledging the dreadful circumstances in which Armenians found themselves 107 years ago. And let's make no mistake, this was a genocide. And for those who would suggest this is not genocide, it is an appalling condemnation. The world is going through tremendous upheaval at the moment, and it's because we don't remember what occurred 107 years ago that the world still finds itself in those circumstances.
In December 2011, I became the first Australian MP to visit Nagorno-Karabakh. I also had the honour to lay a wreath at the National Genocide Museum and Memorial in Yerevan. I'm on the record in Parliament and in the community speaking about the need to recognise the Armenian Genocide, the right to self-determination by the people of Artsakh, and the need to support the Republic of Armenia. I continue to pray that one day there is lasting and long peace in the region, and there is peace, and there's a peace in which Turkey recognizes Armenia and the Armenian Genocide, Artsakh has self-determination, and Azerbaijan is at peace with Armenia. On that note, I wish to take the opportunity to put my support behind efforts to get the Australian government to recognize the Armenian Genocide. I believe it is time.
Today we remember the 107th anniversary of the Armenian, Assyrian and Greek genocide. A genocide at the hands between 1915 and 1923 of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. I stand with you today in calling on the Australian federal government to reject the Turkish regime's decade-long foreign gag order imposed by threats and intimidation on our federal and state leaders. Our politicians need to listen and to stand with the New South Wales and South Australian state parliaments in recognising the Armenian Genocide for what it really is, genocide. It is our federal government's leaders' failure to recognise past crimes against humanity, which emboldens the pan-Turkic genocidal dictators to commit modern-day atrocities and ethnic cleansing that we are seeing play out in the Republic of Artsakh against the indigenous Armenians, and as well as the regular incursions by the Azeri military into the Republic of Armenia. Today, I will continue to stand with the Armenian community, not only by my words, but by my actions. Today, we remember the Armenian Genocide.
It is important that we take the time to respectfully honour and remember those who had their lives mercilessly taken away from them simply because of their ethnicity. Australia is a nation full of diversity and for which we have fought to protect since our inception as a nation. I stand with the Armenian Australian community in their pursuit for appropriate recognition for what occurred 107 years ago. We must recognise the event for what it was, a genocide. Any description short of this will fail to properly pay tribute to the descendants of those whose ancestors' lives were barbarically taken away from them.
Wolves are out, the tears are on my tail. The secret's out, and that is on the trail, and I don't care. This is not the end. This is not the end. Trouble will come, trouble will go. This is not the end. The birds are circling, missing